to the beat. When you see me come and make some room. Everywhere I go, I'm in the spotlight. This is a good life. I'm living bold. This is what it looks like. On the tip top of the world.
We have an FMC departure, a new direct service connecting Central America to Philadelphia by a U.S. company, a new offshore mining development near American Samoa, U.S. possibly acquiring Finnish icebreakers, a call to simplify surface transportation, looming tariff deadlines, and a really cool new development out of Maersk. Stick around, there's a lot to talk about today. Hi, welcome back to By Land and by Sea, an attorney breaking down the week in supply chain, presented by the Maritime Professor. Me, I'm Lauren Beagen, founder of the Maritime Professor and Squall Strategies, and I'm a former FMC International Affairs attorney. By Land and by Sea is your friendly guide to the regulatory twists and turns of global ocean shipping. Me, I'm your favorite maritime attorney, making sense of it all so you don't have to. As always, the guidance here is general and for educational purposes only. It should not be construed to be legal advice, and there is no attorney-client privilege created by this video or this podcast. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. This is plain language maritime, created so that anybody, not just lawyers or industry insiders, can understand what's happening in the wild world of supply chain. Let's dive into this week's episode because, as you know, ocean shipping moves the world. All right, story number one. It's true, Chairman Lou Sola has officially announced that he will conclude his term at the Federal Maritime Commission on June 30th. Yes, that's in a few days from now. He's ending his tenure that began actually in 2018 with a unanimous Senate confirmation, and he had a mission to strengthen U.S. maritime competitiveness and supply chain security. So in his farewell message, Sola reflected, and I want to kind of read his actual words from the message. If you go to the FMC's website, you can actually see his departure message. But it says, June 30th, 2025 marks the conclusion of my tenure as chairman of the U.S. FMC. Serving our nation in this capacity has been the honor of a lifetime. I have had the privilege of helping safeguard the integrity of the U.S. maritime industry, bringing greater transparency to port operations, and overseeing a supply chain that moves more than $5 trillion in goods annually. Nominated by President Donald J. Trump in 2018 and unanimously confirmed by the U.S. Senate, I entered this role with clear objectives: to strengthen American competitiveness, protect our ports and supply chain from foreign influence, and bring lasting accountability to the global shipping system. So, through his own words, through his departure statement, he said that he was proud of a few things that he had done, and in this, I mean, it was 7 years, but relatively shorter, well, I don't even want to say shorter, 7 years. Really what happens these days is FMC commissioners are on for 2 5-year terms, so 10 years, so 7 out of 10 years is not bad. That's a long time. During that time, he led Fact Finding 30, which was an investigation on what commercial measures passenger cruise lines could adopt to mitigate COVID-19 impacts. He worked, in his own words, tirelessly during the post-COVID supply chain crisis, helping address widespread logistics disruptions. In his own words, he said he was a staunch supporter of U.S. LNG as a maritime fuel, advocating for its role in future energy and shipping strategies. And most recently, he led, he was the leader behind major investigations into flags of convenience, which could call for the deflagging of some of these sanctioned vessels. And this is actually an ongoing investigation that's still open for comment. It's going to be open for comment through August. So if you have anything to do with flags of convenience, if you find that flags of convenience might be impacting the unfavorable shipping conditions or perhaps creating unfair shipping conditions or supply chain conditions that relate to ocean shipments, the FMC wants to know through this investigation. He also helped spur the investigation into the maritime choke points, which we're still waiting on kind of a next steps from that. But again, remember, the FMC maritime choke points investigation looked at 7 different choke points, but opened up the conversation to any choke points out there where they were really looking for, are those choke points or are those areas named in the investigation, were any of the activities around them raising to the level of unfair or unfavorable shipping conditions that the FMC could then use their authorities, the Foreign Shipping Practices Act or Section 19 of the Merchant Marine Act of 1920. Both of those authorities that the FMC has gives them the ability to take corrective actions for unfavorable shipping conditions or unfair shipping conditions. That's why we saw a kind of increase in exposure or it was brought to light, right? Under the leadership of Chairman Sola, both of those authorities were brought to light from some of these investigations, but these weren't the only times that these investigations or these authorities had been used, but it felt like they were being used in a little bit more of a forward-leaning way, and also challenging the industry to speak up if they were facing unfair treatment overseas so that the FMC could take action and that they could know what was going on. So Sola's time at the helm brought increased visibility to the FMC's global authority. And again, that was visibility. They already had these authorities. These were already authorities that the FMC had been using, sparingly, admittedly, but using for years, especially in moments of crisis. But look, Chairman Sola focused on not only commercial fairness and energy futures, but also on enforcing sanctions and challenging kind of opaque international practices, I guess I would say, from the Maritime Choke Points investigation. He was standing up for transparency, supply chain security, and a U.S. maritime system that would hopefully be, I think he would probably see, less vulnerable to foreign influence or foreign creation of unfavorable shipping conditions. So it seemed as though he was kind of telling U.S. shippers, U.S. interests. So the FMC, remember, is responsible for the U.S. importer, exporter, and consumer, protecting the interests of the U.S. importer, exporter, and consumer. And he was essentially kind of saying to the industry, their stakeholders, if you're facing unfair treatment overseas for shipping-related ocean movement of goods, say something. The FMC can't take action if they don't know what's happening. And so having these two authorities on highlight, I thought that this was such a interesting new highlighting of these authorities in ways that aligned with the administration's themes of USA First, but also in ways that were trying to create more favorable shipping conditions overall and perhaps illuminating unfavorable shipping conditions that may have not quite had the stage, I guess I would say, to be brought to light. So the Maritime Choke Points investigation closed up about a month or two ago. We still have this essentially flags of convenience investigation happening now. But both of those are predicated on the Foreign Shipping Practices Act and also Section 19 of the Merchant Marine Act of 1920. Not new tools, but under Sola's leadership, they've been actively used to push back on international practices that potentially harm these U.S. interests. I think Chairman Sola has done a fantastic job during his leadership and during his tenure as a commissioner as well. I'm so interested to see where he goes next. I don't think that he's done by any means, but I'm interested to see where he lands next. I wish him well, and I think he's done a great job leading the FMC. All right, story number 2. So Crowley is launching its first ever direct Central America Philly route. I'm bringing this up because this is a U.S. ocean carrier company, and I think that it's important to highlight, since there's a movement and a theme of U.S. ocean carriers and U.S. companies being elevated under the Trump administration, I wanted to mention this because I'm actually sometimes asked, do some of these U.S. companies have international service? And they do. And so I wanted to bring this one up. So Crowley is introducing a new maritime service that directly connects Central America with the U.S. East Coast via Port of Philadelphia. And what's interesting here is also that they're using new LNG-powered vessels, right? We just talked about Chairman Sola and almost formerly Chairman Sola, but Chairman Sola being a staunch supporter of U.S. LNG as a maritime fuel, and now here you have a U.S. company using new LNG-powered vessels. They're saying that this will deliver the fastest transit times in the market, according to Rainier Van Delden, who is the VP of Commercial Operations at Crowley Logistics. JOC did a reporting on this announcement, and they highlighted how this route will serve both container and refrigerated produce exporters and importers from Central America's northern zone, including El Salvador, Nicaragua, Guatemala, and Honduras. So perishables like bananas, pineapples, melons have traditionally come through perhaps maybe some of the more southern ports, but this is interesting having Philadelphia kind of in the mix now, already leading as a refrigerated cargo port. with great cold storage infrastructure and good access to Northeast population centers. So this new service could help reduce some of those inland transit times or perhaps just increase options, right? So reefer volumes have been rising. Shippers are seeking speed to market. This direct route could really help importers supplying supermarket, wholesalers, and food service chains in the Mid-Atlantic and the Northeast. Basically, more direct, faster, cheaper, fresher service could potentially be coming through Philadelphia via this U.S. company. So we'll see, but I wanted to highlight this, like I said, not only for the LNG vessel, but also just to highlight that, yes, these U.S. companies do serve internationally. As I understand it, I don't think that they put out all of the vessels that are serving in the service, but it might not only be a U.S. flag vessel in this service, but it is a U.S. company. We talked about that a little bit when we talked about the port fees that were under the USTR proposal, that it changed away from U.S. flag only, and then there was kind of preference for U.S. company. This is kind of one of those situations. This might not be a U.S. flag vessel, but this is a U.S. company. All right, story number 3. Offshore mineral exploration kicks off near American Samoa. Well, almost, right? So for the first time in over 30 years, the U.S. is reviewing offshore mineral leases. So BOEM, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, has started the environmental review process for the first time in almost 30 years, reviewing these offshore mineral leases in the Pacific, specifically the American Samoa. G-Captain reported on this. So these leases aim to support exploration for critical minerals, things like rare earth elements, nickel, cobalt. These are things that we've talked about or heard talked about in mainstream media news, these critical minerals, rare earth minerals, kind of all this stuff that's very valuable. These are essential for batteries, renewable energy tech, national defense systems. And so why the American Samoa? Its surrounding seabed could host these polymetallic nodules, which are rock formations rich in valuable metals. BOEM is saying that it's just in the early stages, but it signals kind of the shift in U.S. strategy. And it's happening now because global competition for critical minerals is intensifying, right? Obviously, not many people probably were talking much about it, and now here it is in mainstream media. China does dominate the current market, as I understand it. Western countries are looking for these alternatives, U.S. being one of them. So domestic offshore mining, even in U.S. territories, could become part of that solution. The U.S. is exploring its own undersea backyard for these metals that power everything, like I said, from smartphones to submarines. It's still in the early days, but exploration of the seafloor around our territories has been going on for a while. We also have been exploring extended continental shelf. So continental shelf is kind of seafloor, but beyond. That's been a project that was led by the State Department. These are not new things to know that there are these fantastic minerals, but it's from a scientific standpoint, this is an interesting development. I think that this is going to be really interesting to see what we can find there, especially if they really are polymetallic nodules. We have all sorts of rich, valuable minerals and metals that are in these areas, or we hope, right? And so that's what this first step is. It's just the first step, early stages, reviewing the environmental impact, reviewing the environmental review process, reviewing mineral leases generally. But we might find out what we have around the American Samoa pretty soon. All right, story number 4. The U.S. is looking to buy icebreakers from Finland. So we've talked about icebreakers before. The U.S. has a very small supply of icebreakers, but just this week, you may have seen in the mainstream news, President Trump was at the NATO summit. While he was there, he announced, G-Captain's reporting, that he announced that the U.S. is in talks to purchase up to 15 icebreakers from Finland. 15. And that would wildly increase our ice-breaking capacity. This is according to G-Captain. This would be a major leap forward for U.S. polar capability. So icebreakers obviously help ships navigate frozen waters, especially in the Arctic. The U.S. only has a few working ones. Russia, for kind of example, has over 30. We have 2 major icebreakers that I know of, and it's somewhere in that vicinity, right? So why Finland? Finland is one of the top icebreaker shipbuilders in the world. Buying from them could help fast-track American capabilities. Trump has said recently, I believe in the past few months, he's it's only been a few months, but in the past few months he said that he wanted 30 big icebreakers. So this 15 icebreaker purchase would be a fantastic leap forward in our icebreaking capacity in the U.S. here. As Arctic shipping routes are opening up, competition for control is heating up. Icebreakers means more access, right? More safety and more presence in these sensitive waters. We are an Arctic nation. We still have Alaska, right? We have Alaska as inclusion of the U.S. into the Arctic. So we obviously need icebreakers. We need more access, more safety, and more presence in these sensitive waters. The U.S., I almost don't want to say it too much, but I can't say it enough. It's short on icebreakers, and this deal with Finland really might help us catch up before the Arctic really becomes the place to be. I mean, it is the place to be, but we need more icebreakers, and I'm going to keep watching to see if this Finland deal goes through. 15 icebreakers. That's fantastic. All right, story number 5. Congress, we have an opinion piece written by Representative Sam Graves. He's a Republican from Missouri. He wrote an opinion piece in the Washington Times. He's the chairman of House T&I Committee, so the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. We've talked about them before. They represent and cover, they cover the Coast Guard. They cover roads, rail, bridges, pipelines, maritime policy, Coast Guard, MARAD, and even the FMC. So he's the chair of House T&I. In this opinion piece, he kind of laid out his plans for the next surface transportation bill. And his message was pretty simple. He said it's time to get back to the basics. He wants to get back to simplifying highways, bridges, rail, and freight routes. So who is Representative Graves? He's a representative of Missouri's 6th district and has deep roots in transportation. He's a 6th-generation farmer. He's a pilot, so transportation and infrastructure makes sense, and a small business owner. He has chaired the T&I committee for the past about 2 years, and then previously led the subcommittee on highways and transit. So the T&I committee, like I said, oversees a broad portfolio, everything from the rails, roads, bridges, all of that. But notably, we've talked about them before because they oversee MARAD and the FMC's budget and also Coast Guard. This committee does play a critical role in how federal dollars shape America's logistics and infrastructure backbone. So why now? Why is this an opinion piece that he's entering into the Washington Times right now? Well, the current surface transportation law, so this is the surface transportation law, expires September 30th, 2026. So just about a year and some change, a year and a quarter, a year and a half away. But he says that the committee is already starting to get to work on that. He's held several hearings this year and says that he's listening to feedback from across the country. So I want to pull a little bit of his actual words from his opinion piece. So he wrote, in the next surface transportation reauthorization bill, we're going back to basics. After recent years of expanding and creating more programs, spending money we don't have, and losing money to project approval inefficiencies, we can and must focus on our most fundamental infrastructure needs. So Graves also marked the anniversary of the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956, signed by President Eisenhower, which was a major milestone that created the U.S. interstate highway system. This landmark legislation authorized the construction of 41,000 miles of interstate highway system. Eisenhower strongly believed that the Allied victory in World War II was aided by Europe's sophisticated highway system, and he recognized that an interstate system was essential for economic growth, national defense, and everyday efficient transportation. He added, when the Federal Aid Highway Act of 1956 was signed into law, it represented the most significant investment in American transportation to date and resulted in a monumental achievement in American shipbuilding. Wouldn't that be nice? American building. Since 1956, Congress has been responsible for the regular reauthorization of our surface transportation programs, which is why shipbuilding didn't make sense there. Responsible for the regular reauthorization of our surface transportation programs. Our limited federal resources should always be focused on moving people and goods safely and efficiently. So Graves emphasized state flexibility, saying that local leaders are in the best position to judge their infrastructure needs, especially in rural areas like Missouri, his district. He argues too much federal red tape gets in the way. He says we need to continue to empower states and limit federal intrusion. Basically, this is a call to focus federal spending where it makes the most impact, fixing roads, bridges, freight corridors. It's a reminder that without strong basics, the entire supply chain can stumble. Graves is positioning this next bill to be back to basics. And I think, to me, that feels like he's signaling, I mean, it might just be a nice thing to say, but to me it feels like he's signaling that we're going to streamline it, make it simple, hopefully, but he's going to make it so that they're trying to reduce inefficiencies in getting those federal dollars out into the overall fixing of roads, bridges, and freight corridors. It sounds like he's really trying to get that service reauthorization back to basics. So we'll see what it looks like. We got just over a year before we're going to see a new vote on that, hopefully before that. But the last one expires September 30th, 2026. So I'm glad to see that they're getting to work. All right, story number 6. So tariff deadlines, right? Don't forget, July 9th is fast approaching. Remember the 90-day pause on the tariffs that are coming from the Trump administration. So according to Bloomberg, Bloomberg was reporting on this, pressure's building, obviously, for the Trump administration to finalize multiple trade agreements before the fast approaching July 9th deadline. This deadline is tied to the Section 301 tariffs, but then also, which is the IEEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, originally imposed in response to unfair trade practices. So these tariffs were initially set at 10%. They could jump. Right? That's what this pause is talking about. There's a lot going on. I'm not going to dive too far into all of the specifics here, but I want to bring your attention to this July 9th deadline. I also want to say that I've heard a little bit of mumblings that that July 9th date might be pushed again if needed, but I think that the pressure is also being factored into perhaps the negotiating on this. So the Bloomberg article actually goes through and talks a little bit about each country. So we have the European Union. Both sides are discussing a principles agreement to extend talks past July, but tensions are rising. President Trump has publicly expressed frustration and threatened to walk away. Let's see. We're going to see what continues to happen there. India, talks remain stuck over agricultural goods. The U.S. wants market access for genetically modified crops. India says no. India, in turn, wants an exemption from U.S. retaliatory tariffs. They were going to talk, as I understand it, again during the G7, but then because Trump had to leave early, that meeting unfortunately didn't happen. So I can only imagine they're still talking, right? We also have Vietnam. So I'm not going to actually go through the rest of all these, but Bloomberg goes through. I highly suggest that you go check out this Bloomberg article. But they talk about Vietnam, Japan, South Korea, Thailand, Malaysia, Switzerland, Canada, which actually I think that we just may have had some breaking news on that. But I don't like to break the news. I like to just reflect on it, but I just saw an alert come through. And then Mexico. So they break down kind of all these different things. I think that this is a fantastic article. Look, missing this July 9th deadline could create tariff hikes. And I don't think I think that the pressure stays there, but I don't think that many people really want that tariff hike to happen because this is affecting the imports, right? And this is affecting electronics, food imports, and ultimately could be passed along to the end consumer. But I think that right now what we're seeing is negotiation happening out there in the public. So it's the time to watch. I thought we were going to see a lot more deals being done in June. I still think that the days leading up to the 4th of July, we could see some more trade deals being announced, perhaps because of Trump's time in NATO this week. Maybe there's going to be a kind of a slew of new trade deals announced early next week before July 4th. We'll see, right? But the trade clock is ticking. This July 9th deadline is coming up. I think negotiations are still tense, I guess I would say. They're still being worked out. I hear a lot of positive messaging, but the deadline is still coming up. So we'll see. All right, story number 7. This one is cool. So Maersk has introduced a new AI-driven tool called Trade and Tariff Studio, and it's aimed at simplifying the complex world of customs clearance and tariff classification for global cargo owners. I really encourage you to go take a look at this. I think that this just seems cool. So a little bit of background on this. With rising trade tensions, shifting tariff schedules, and fragmented customs systems across countries, many shippers are finding it harder to keep up and often end up overpaying, potentially, or facing delays. So according to Maersk, even major companies still use dozens of disconnected brokers, which creates inefficiencies and potentially missed opportunities. So I'm going to read directly from their announcement. So after comprehensive pilots with large customers, the solution will be available as from the 28th of June. So today's the 27th, so as of tomorrow, for cargo imported into the U.S., the full rollout covering the rest of the world is scheduled for August. The product is best used by cargo owners as part of their integrated logistics services by Maersk, but can also be implemented as a standalone solution. So many, this is continuing to read from their announcement, many even globally active companies still rely on up to 30 to 40 different local customs brokers based in as many ports or countries, resulting in fragmented data, limited visibility, and unnecessarily paid duties. This decentralized approach is increasingly unsustainable in a world where tariff levels are not only higher, but also much more volatile, as we know, right? We just talked about that. The announcement continues to say, Maersk data shows that 5 to 6% of tariffs are overpaid on average due to lack of centralized data and optimization. 20% of shipment delays are caused by poor customs preparation. Only 50 to 55% of trade that is eligible for existing free trade agreements actually use the respective FTAs. And more than 650 FTAs exist, but they are complex and companies often don't have the resources to fully understand all applying details at origin and destination. Hence, many owners of global supply chains are leaving significant savings untapped. As a centralized intelligence solution, Maersk Trade and Tariff Studio is a global customs platform that combines, and again, I'm still reading off their announcement, AI-powered tariff engineering and optimization, ensuring the correct application of over 6,000 product codes and 20,000 plus subcodes. Upstream compliance risk screening, helping customers avoid delays, detention, and penalties, real-time updates from data partners, as well as Maersk's network of over 2,700 customs experts across the globe, all feeding tariff and regulation changes into a unified system. This is the end of the reading from their announcement. The platform solution allows the integration of trusted local brokers while still ensuring a global overview. Doesn't that sound kind of cool? I think this sounds cool. So for companies managing cross-border shipments, tariff classification errors and regulatory missteps are common and expensive. Tools like this aim to reduce those errors. I think so, right? I think so. They're trying to automate this system. They're trying to make it easier for cargo owners to keep up with customs requirements, especially as rules and tariffs change more frequently. It's a new option to watch for shippers managing complex international flows. It almost kind of feels like they're giving global shippers an AI-powered GPS for customs paperwork, right? It helps them avoid costly potholes and perhaps detours in the regulatory landscape as things are kind of moving around quickly. Instead of kind of trying to comply at the last second, maybe this is a helpful introduction of AI in this overall customs landscape. I think that this is cool. I think this is worth checking out. I think we're going to see a lot more AI integration that will automate some of those otherwise kind of complex things, but worth checking out. I think this has the potential to be really cool. We'll see. All right, story number 8. This is the last one. So the ILA president praised Trump's Iran strikes. I only bring this up because I thought that this was so interesting, because we went from October 1, the port strikes, right? We had 3 days of a port strike. We had a lot of uncertainty on who was going to be elected president. And then when it was Trump, it wasn't clear if the ILA was going to kind of be on his side or not even be on his side, but how that was going to play out for a January restart after the pause of the labor strike. And so what we saw in December was, it seems like the ILA and President Trump actually, Harold Daggett, the president of the ILA, apparently they go way back, right? That's what I had been kind of understood as they go way back. And so the ILA typically kind of doesn't really get involved in a lot of these geopolitical military type things. But look, the president of the ILA this week publicly applauded President Trump's recent strike on Iran. Marking the first time the ILA has formally endorsed the U.S. military action. Just really interesting. I don't want to go into the politics of all of this. I'm not trying to talk about Iran. But the ILA saying that they support, that the president of the ILA publicly applauding President Trump, they've come out and said that the ILA means I love America, so they're kind of aligning themselves with this pro-U.S., obviously, but Trump's theme of pro-U.S. Their stances usually focus on labor rights, contracts, economic conditions, but not usually foreign policy. Look, to me, it feels like this endorsement is sending a message of port workers and maritime labor are signaling alignment, I guess, with national security actions, or maybe even just support of the president as he continues to navigate. I'm not sure exactly, right? The union that typically cares about the things that are related to labor is now just having maybe a little comment on political military. I only bring it up because I thought that it was interesting, and I thought that you might find it interesting as well. Not a judgment either way. I just thought that that was an interesting change in typical area that the ILA comments on, right? Endorsing U.S. military action. There you have it. I thought that it was interesting. Well, so that concludes our show today. If you like this episode, be sure to follow, subscribe, and leave a review. Want to go deeper or bring this kind of insight to your team? Visit themaritimeprofessor.com to explore corporate trainings, tailored briefings, on-demand webinars, online courses. I'm going to continue to build those out. If your organization needs help navigating the legal or strategic side of ocean shipping regulations, head over to Squall Strategies. That's where I provide those consulting services, regulatory guidance, and policy support for clients working directly with the FMC and across global supply chain. As always, this podcast is for educational purposes only. It is not legal advice. If you need an attorney, contact an attorney. But until next time, I'm Lauren Beagen, the Maritime Professor, and you've just listened to By Land and By Sea. See you next time.